Well, good evening to you. There's been an announcement from the Ministry of Public Enterprises today that Jabu Mabuza will now be both the acting Chair of Eskom and the acting CEO of Eskom. This means he'll take over the running of the parastatal from Phakamani Hadebe, who's leaving Eskom this week. Mabuza is now expected to be in both of these positions for 3 months, while a new CEO for Eskom is found. Adrian Lackay is the spokesperson for the Ministry of Public Enterprises. He joins me on the phone now from Pretoria. Adrian, good evening to you. Why is Jabu Mabuza now going to be doing both of these jobs?
Good evening, Stephen. Thank you for the opportunity. I think Eskom is in a bit of some emergency situation, and it requires someone to act for an interim period who can provide continuity. Mr. Mabuza has been appointed to lead the Eskom board in January 2018 by President Cyril Ramaphosa when he was deputy president. And that board has gone through a process over the past 18 months or so to bring some kind of stability to the institution. And hopefully, in this interim period, the board can commit itself to find a suitable replacement in the form of a permanent CEO, as Mr. Phakamani Hadebe finishes his term on Wednesday after he resigned earlier this year. So it's pretty much an interim measure.
You've had 3 months to find a person to be the CEO of Eskom. Is that proving to be quite difficult? It is, I think everyone would agree, possibly the hardest job in the country.
I don't know if a Group CEO of Eskom is harder work than being the Minister of Public Enterprises, quite frankly. But yes, it's certainly a daunting task. As you know, there are very tough and urgent measures that must be implemented regarding Eskom. The utility must be separated, its business divisions, into 3 separate entities. We await the appointment of a Chief Restructuring Officer that the Minister of Finance also spoke about again last week. Eskom received more fiscal support in the form of 59 billion, in the form of a special appropriation from the Treasury. So Eskom has big problems, big decisions must be made, and it's absolutely essential at the moment that for an interim period, there's some kind of stability, knowledgeable leadership, hopefully to a point where a good CEO can, 1, be found, and 2, successfully appointed, that could then take the organization forward to the next steps where it should go. It has a huge debt burden. It poses huge fiscal risks to the country. And I think, as the President has repeatedly indicated this year, it needs urgent and decisive action.
You spoke about the Chief Restructuring Officer. I mean, this is someone who might have the kind of power within Eskom that comes close to the CEO. Are you expecting to make that appointment yourselves? Is it the National Treasury themselves who do it, or will it be both of you?
It will be a decision, Ministers Mboweni and Gordon, and obviously they would have canvassed through Cabinet on a suitable candidate. And I believe that appointment is imminent as well. And we'll see what the focus of that CRO will be. From where I'm speaking now, a strong priority for that person should be the balance sheet issues. Eskom has a huge debt, as you know, more than 400 billion. It has to continuously borrow to stay solvent. It's not collecting monies owed to it by consumers. It didn't get the tariff increases it hoped for by the regulator this year. So there's huge debt restructuring issues that must be dealt with in order to put the company back on the path of financial sustainability. And part of that exercise must be someone with the appropriate skills to dive deep and look into the balance sheet. What is workable? What are good assets? What are bad assets? What can you move around? And what can you use to return the company that it can stand on its own feet and stop the reliance on the fiscals?
There are 2 obvious questions about the announcement that came from your ministry today around Jabu Mabuza, and I'll talk about governance in a moment. But let's just first talk about the difficulty of these jobs. I mean, Phakamani Hadebe said he was leaving the job because of his health. Now, Jabu Mabuza is going to do both jobs. He's a fit man, but are you worried about that at all?
Look, I think when he agreed for the 3-month stint, he did so out of the interest of Eskom and the country. He knows the institution by now. He knows the difficulties that lie ahead. And he knows that if you want to appoint, for example, someone from inside the institution, you have to find someone who has a demonstrable record maybe that wasn't an option at the time. If you want to appoint someone from outside, you have to go through a process. And that process must be, you must advertise, which they've started to do already. Then you must go through a process of interviewing people, testing their competencies, and coming up with a short list. If that doesn't work, you have to actively go out and headhunt. So I think knowing Mr. Mabuza, he did so in the interest of Eskom and understanding the challenges and the urgent needs really for some kind of continuity and stability when after Mr. Hadebe leaves on Wednesday.
Okay, and then the governance issue. I realize there'll be King Governance 3 and 4 that you'll have to look at. But under Eskom's own rules and under the legislation, is the chairman of the parastatal, the biggest parastatal that we have, are they actually allowed to be the CEO at the same time, even in an acting basis?
The legal view presented to the ministry is yes, it is permissible in terms of the Companies Act. It's obviously not desirable in the long run or on the long term. So that's why it's an interim measure, and it's really to ensure that Mr. Mabuza can also direct the board for the next 3 months, that you must commit to finding a suitable candidate. We don't have options. We don't want to violate good governance because this board has done some work to bring a measure of respectability back to how Eskom is governed. When they were appointed in 2018, their governance record was such that none of the commercial lenders wanted to extend credit to Eskom anymore because of the evidence that was emerging about state capture and corruption. So they've managed to bring some credibility back to the institution from a government's point of view. And I don't think any actions Mr. Mabuza would want to take over this period would want to undo or reverse those gains, Stephen.
All right, we are expecting, of course, the AGM for Eskom to come through this week, and all the predictions are that it's going to make possibly the biggest loss, or probably the biggest loss in the history of SOEs within South Africa. And at the same time, there was the warning earlier in the year that there could be load shedding this winter. Are you able to give us any updates on the financial or the power producing position of Eskom, or are you going to make us wait for that meeting?
Unfortunately, on the numbers side, you'll have to wait for the announcement of the annual financial statements. I think me pronouncing on it now would be violating good governance. Secondly, on electricity generation, fortunately, we are halfway or past halfway through our winter period. They managed to keep the lights on without any instances of load shedding. Power supply remains stable, but still erratic when we look at the margins of planned and unplanned outages. And Eskom gave us a figure of 9,500 megawatts. If they can keep unplanned and planned to below 9,500, that was on the 3rd of April, they gave us this figure, then things should be fine in winter. They managed to keep it under that level, but it still jumps around, which doesn't instill confidence on the generation side. But they've managed to keep the lights on for the sake of the economy. We hope that will continue for the rest of winter and that we'll have stable electricity supply, because the effects again on GDP, if you have stage 4 load shedding, is very, very devastating, as we've seen in the growth figures for quarters 1 and 2 of this financial year. So that must be avoided. They've done well so far, and we hope that operationally that work can continue. Some new units and all the units that were under refurbishment did come back into generation. So hopefully they can build on that momentum.
The spokesperson for the Ministry of Public Enterprises, Adrian Lackay, on the line there. Adrian, thank you for your time today on The Full View.